Addicted to alcohol, cigarettes, food, even sex. What about painkillers? Researchers and some addicts are now turning their eyes to an illegal substance for help.
Researchers in Britain have found that psychedelic drugs can create a higher level of consciousness.
Why some psychiatrists and researchers are giving psychedelic drugs a second look.
The project, led by David Luke at the University of Greenwich, will focus on dimethyltryptamine, the most psychedelic drug in the world. Luke hopes that this project will help shed light on whether or not the powerful substances can offer a cure.
And it's thought that in certain states of consciousness, people can have experiences of mental imagery, perhaps even if they are congenitally blind.
Now, it's difficult to imagine a society more different from the society of ancient Egypt than our society today. We hate visionary states in this society. In our society, if we want to insult somebody, we call them a dreamer. In ancient societies, that was praise. And we have erected huge apparatuses of armed bureaucracies who will invade our privacy, who will break down our doors, who will arrest us, who will send us to prison, sometimes for years, for possessing even small quantities of psilocybin or substances like DMT, whether in its smokable form or in the ayahuasca brew. And yet, ironically, DMT is, we now know, a natural brain hormone. We all have it in our bodies, and it's just that its function remains unknown for lack of research.
Researchers across the nation are tuning in and turning on to psychedelics a few generations after psychologist Timothy Leary unintentionally stigmatized them. In the 1960s, Leary conducted a series of valid experiments with LSD and psilocybin. But as he devolved into an infamous psychedelic poster boy, the drugs escaped the lab.
The natural state of the brain is chaos.
In 1970, the federal government made the drugs illegal, in the same category as heroin. The mainstream medical community tapped out, even though there was a lot of data suggesting the drugs might help people with certain mental illnesses.
I was fascinated that how could this have been such a big part of psychiatry and that I never heard about it, completely buried in my training. And that just made me really curious to look further into it.
It's not as though our society is opposed in principle to altered states of consciousness. I mean, billions are being made by the unholy alliance of psychiatrists and big pharma in overprescribing drugs to control so-called syndromes like depression or attention deficit disorder in teenagers. And we have a love affair in our society with alcohol. We glorify this most boring of drugs, despite the terrible consequences that it often has. And of course, we love our stimulants, our tea, our coffee, our energy drinks, our sugar, and huge industries are built around these substances, which are valued because of the way they alter consciousness. But what all these approved altered states of consciousness have in common is that none of them contradict or conflict with the basic state of consciousness valued by our society, which I would call the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness.
Why is it that in the entire Western world, these substances that have been found to be so interesting by hundreds of cultures for thousands of years are prohibited? How did these cultures that consider themselves to be enlightened, democratic, and scientific get to declaring plants illegal? It can seem weird, but there's clearly something deep and revealing about the nature of these societies.
Our society values alert, problem-solving consciousness, and it devalues all other states of consciousness. Any kind of consciousness that is not related to the production or consumption of material goods is stigmatized in our society today. Of course, we accept drunkenness. We allow people some brief respite from the material grind. A society that subscribes to that model is a society that is going to condemn states of consciousness that have nothing to do with the alert problem-solving mentality.
The fact that these studies are happening at all represents a mighty change in the scientific community, a renaissance in thinking about psychedelic drugs like MDMA, LSD, and psilocybin, the drug found in magic mushrooms.
Why has the war on drugs been such an abysmal failure?
Well, first of all, it's not really a war on drugs. It's a war on some drugs. And the drugs that are government sanctioned and they're taxing them, those are not illegal. Alcohol is available almost everywhere you look. It's one of the worst drugs we have. As far as the consequences of using it, it's one of the most screwed up drugs available to people, and it's everywhere. We just sort of understand that one shot of Jack Daniels has this effect, one beer has that effect, and it's because of the fact that it's pretty strictly regulated, and it's part of our culture and has been for a long time. We've just accepted the fact that this drug is at every restaurant you go to, is at every supermarket you go to, is in drugstores, it's everywhere. I mean, it's amazing. And there's nothing wrong with alcohol, don't get me wrong. I'm 100% down with you being able to do whatever you want to do with your body. But we're incredibly inconsistent. The amount of prescription drugs that are prescribed in this country points to that. The amount of people in this country that are hooked on meth, the amount of people in this country that are hooked on pharmaceutical drugs. These are huge, huge numbers. And then there's drugs like marijuana, which literally hurt almost no one.
But I think everybody realizes that the promise of a society over-monopolistically based upon this state of consciousness has proved hollow, and that this model is no longer working, that it's broken in every possible sense that a model can be broken, and that urgently we need to find something to replace it. The vast problems of global pollution that have resulted from the single-minded pursuit of profit, the horrors of nuclear proliferation, the specter of hunger, that millions every night go to bed starving, that we can't even solve this problem despite our alert problem-solving state of consciousness. And look what's happening in the Amazon, the lungs of our planet, this precious home of biodiversity. The old-growth rainforest being cut down and replaced with soybean farms so we can feed cattle so that we can all eat hamburgers. Only a truly insane global state of consciousness could allow such an abomination to occur. We can spend countless billions on warfare, on hatred, on fear, on suspicion, on division, but we can't get together the collective effort to save the lungs of our planet. And this is perhaps why shamans from the Amazon are now mounting a kind of reverse missionary activity. When I've asked shamans about the sickness of the West, they say it's quite simple. You guys have severed your connection with spirit. Unless you reconnect with spirit and do so soon, you're going to bring the whole house of cards down around your heads and ours.
Something with researchers out of the UK, something they want to do to find out if psychedelic drugs can actually help people whose brains are unable to form mental images, as bizarre as it may sound. Now, could this be a blindness miracle?
When he took the drug, he told researchers, quote, "I never had any visual images come to me. I can't see or imagine what light or dark might look like. During my psychedelic experiences, whenever I listened to music, I felt as if I were immersed in the most beautiful waterfall ever."
One of the things, besides what it does, one of the things about DMT that always fascinated me was the fact that it's such a simple molecule. It's everywhere. So all organisms have tryptophan, and all organisms have the two key enzymes that lead to the synthesis of DMT. And these enzymes are very ancient enzymes. They're all over the place. They're, again, part of basic metabolism. So theoretically, anything could synthesize DMT.
That's the $64 billion question, is why is DMT in our bodies? Why is it in plants, in all sorts of mammals? And what is the role it plays in humans?
The conventional wisdom 30, 40 years ago was that these things had no real function. They were just sort of physiological noise, but that's a very naive understanding. And what we now understand is that these secondary compounds are, in a sense, the language of plants.
Why is it that human beings' central nervous system are wired to receive this experience? Must be that there's important information to be learned.
And I've had one trip where literally I felt like I was looking through their eye at the world below, and like I was a caretaker. I cared about the beings below. Like all those beings were all like encircled around like the earth and like touching each other and like infusing their energy in the earth. And I just felt that power and that love and that compassion, and I just felt like I needed to bring that love and compassion of everyone back into the world with me.
Let's go rather to the ancient Egyptians, who put their best minds to work for 3,000 years on the problem of death and on the problem of how we should live our lives to prepare for what we will confront after death. And the ancient Egyptians expressed their ideas in transcendent art, which still touches us emotionally today, and they came to certain very specific conclusions that the soul does survive death and that we will be held accountable for every thought, every action, every deed that we have lived through in our lives. So we better take this precious opportunity to be born in a human body seriously and make the most of it. And in these inquiries into the mystery of death, the ancient Egyptians weren't just exercising their imaginations. They highly valued dream states, and it's now known that they used visionary plants like the hallucinogenic blue water lily. And it's interesting that the ancient Egyptian tree of life has recently been identified as the Acacia nilotica, which contains high quantities of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the same active ingredient that we find in ayahuasca.